My name is Cheryl Pemberton. I'm so glad you could join us tonight, and I'm glad that you're supportive of our virtual programs. I am going to ask if you could keep your mic muted throughout the program, although if you have questions throughout the program, please feel free to put them in chat, and Angie will get to them as much as possible during the program. I'm also going to put a link to the survey. Mid-continent, we got to know how everybody's feeling about our program. So I'll put a link to the survey at the beginning of the program, at the end of the program. And I also wanted to remind you about our next Buzzworthy books, which will be January 7th, 2025, again at 7 o'clock. And I will put a link to the registration for that January program in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Angie. Angie Strathman, thank you for joining us tonight.
All right, thank you, Cheryl. I recognize some of you from before, but if this is your first time joining us, this is a program that we do quarterly, virtually. My name is Angie Strathman. I work in our reader engagement department, and I am the reading initiatives and display librarian. And so my job is to help our staff know what's coming out so that they can then help you figure them out too. So I love this opportunity to actually share with the public some of the books I've read, some of the books I want to read, some of the books that might be on your radar. Because I don't want to tease you with a bunch of books that you might have to wait a long time. All of the books that I've chosen should be available for you to check out right now, or just a very small, 1 or 2 person wait list if they're not. And then at the end, I'll tease you with a couple of books that are coming out a little bit later that you might have to wait a little bit for. But as Cheryl said, if you do have questions as we go along, feel free to put them in the chat. Let's go ahead and get started, because I have a lot of books I'm excited to tell you about today. So up first, I think everyone's excited about Wicked right now, and so that's kind of bringing in Wizard of Oz kind of feel and flavor. And so I thought I would start off tonight's program with a book that also takes its inspiration from that classic L. Frank Baum book. So this book is called After Oz by Gordon McAlpine. And so this takes elements and characters of the story that we've read and watched and loved and creates something of its own. It creates kind of a murder mystery around it. So After Oz imagines Dorothy, after returning from her adventures to Oz, she's gone missing from the farm for 4 days. No one knows where she went to. And so she comes back and she relates all of her encounters and all of her adventures, including how she took down the Wicked Witch of the West. Well, the townspeople don't really believe her fantastic stories and adventures, and there just so happened to have been an elderly woman in town who died at the same time, and so Dorothy becomes suspected of the murder and is sent to an insane asylum. This is really less of Dorothy's story and more of the narrators who tell it and the mystery behind this woman's murder. So one perspective comes from an unnamed townsperson who is kind of telling the story from that point of view. And the other comes from a psychologist who has come to the town after hearing about Dorothy's fantastical tales. She actually believes Dorothy and wants to help exonerate her. And those sections are mostly told in letters to her mentor. So Gordon McAlpine is an Edgar-nominated author who sadly passed away before this one was published, and so that has kind of a sad connection to it. As I put these programs together, sometimes I end up with unintentional themes. So I have a couple that are tied into current movies and a couple that have been published posthumously. And this is just the first one of both of those. So up next, we have The Arizona Triangle by Cindy Graves. Cindy Graves is actually the pen name for Kate Christensen, who is a literary fiction writer. And this is the start of a new series. So our main character, our detective in this one, is Joe. And Joe works for an all-female private detective agency in Tucson, Arizona. And her childhood best friend is Rose, and she goes missing. And Joe and Rose were really the best of friends up until about age 14, when a boy got in the way. And so the complications of that love triangle have kind of led to an estrangement between the two friends. Well, now Rose is missing, turns up dead, and Rose's mother contacts Jo in order to help her figure out what happened. And so Jo reluctantly returns to her hometown of Delphi, which is also the home to an artist community where she and Rose grew up. So complicating matters even further is that the cop assigned to the case is none other than Tyler, Rose's high school boyfriend, and the other point in that love triangle. And so that adds new layers and new complications to Jo's own investigation. So both this new case and also Jo just returning to her hometown dredge up all these aspects of her past that she had tried to move away from. So this one is for those of you who like mysteries that have very atmospheric settings. This one, the publisher calls it Desert Noir because it has that kind of Arizona Southwest feel where you can kind of feel the heat and the dryness, kind of similar to Jane Harper's mystery novels set in Australia. So that if you like that kind of atmosphere aspect, you might like it. You might also like ones who have those kind of strong, tough female PI characters. So Sue Grafton's Kinsey Mahone is probably the most famous one of those, but Samantha Allen has a series that begins with Pay Dirt Road. Sarah Gran has another kind of tough female PI series as well. So if you enjoy those kinds of characters and those kinds of mysteries, you might want to give this new series a try. All right, up next we have one I'm very excited about and have checked out right now. It's called The City in Glass by Nevo. Nevo is a fantasy writer that writes really kind of interesting takes with kind of low amounts of magic. So if you don't really like the really huge, immersive, detailed world building, she's a great fantasy art writer to try. So Vitrine, this one is all about angels and demons. So Vitrine is a powerful demon who has ruled the city of Osriel, has shaped it into this kind of hedonistic city where everyone's like focused on their desires and how to get them, but so much so that it attracted the attention of the angels who came to destroy it. So Vitrine is devastated and grieving this place that she's attached to and that she put so much of herself into. And so she decides to curse one of the angels, binding him to her for eternity. So out of her feelings of grief and revenge, Vitrine attempts to rebuild the city, all while the relationship to her angel nemesis becomes more complex and nuanced. So they start out as nemeses, and then they're kind of constant companions who are forced to be in each other's presence, and then they start to form a more interesting kind of connection. So Nevo has been nominated for the Hugo Award and is known for very kind of atmospheric, dreamlike settings in her fantasy novels and lyrical writing. And this one is very slim. It's 215 pages. It's a standalone. So if you're someone who sometimes gets intimidated for the big long books and series and fantasy, this is a great one to start with. So you can possibly read this in a single setting, but it will stay with you much longer. And so if you really like that angel demon dynamic, it will appeal to readers who really love This Is How You Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal Al-Matar, mixed with Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. And Nevo has written some other really wonderful fantasy novels. The Siren Queen is like magic and monsters in the movies. And she's wrote the Singing Hills cycle as well. Up next, someone in the chat mentioned that they were reading this book right now. So I might have to ask them to share their perspective if they are comfortable with that. But it is 5 Star Stranger by Kat Tang. And there really is an app for everything nowadays. And this particular app in this novel is called Rental Stranger. And our narrator is called The Stranger, and his job is to work for this company, taking gigs for all sorts of various roles. And so he might be a mourner at a funeral, he might be a fake fiance, he might be someone enlists him as a wingman and when they're trying to pick up women. And he's mostly content with kind of the temporary arrangements that these gigs afford him. But one not so temporary arrangements he's had is for nearly a decade is as pretend father to his next door neighbor, Lily. And Lily's now 9. She's starting to have some questions about their relationship. And so does one of the stranger's other new clients, who is a novelist, who hires him to play one of her characters. So as he's telling the story to the novelist, it causes him to question kind of the narrative arc of his own life and whether or not he wants to just be a minor character in other people's story or to be the main character of his own. And whether he's content to remain a stranger to all of these people or if he wants to be fully seen. So this is kind of a quirky and moving debut novel. And it's in the chat, it's just started, but it seems like it's going to be a heartbreaker. So yes, I've heard that as well. Up next, we have some romance. So this is Fall for Him by Andy Burke. So Dylan has a small crush on his neighbor, Derek, except Derek happens to hate him. He's not quite sure why. But a plumbing mishap leads to Dylan literally falling into Derek's bed when the ceiling collapses and he lands in his downstairs neighbor's apartment. Neither of them want to deal with the headaches of their strict HOA, which I'm sure many of you can relate to. And so Derek agrees to host Dylan in his tiny apartment while Dylan tries to fix up the mess. This forced proximity leads not only to Dylan repairing the ceiling, but also mending their relationship as Dylan and Derek warm to each other in their close confines. This one has a fun meet cute or meet again cute moment. The enemies to lovers and the forced proximity tropes. Fall for Him also brings in Dylan's neurodivergence, Derek's grief, and other aspects of their personal life in a nuanced way. So that two people sharing an apartment setting is reminiscent of Emily Henry's recent Funny story, which was really popular with romance readers. Andy Burke will also appeal to readers of Ashley Herring Blake or Alexis Hall as well. Up next is nonfiction. This is one that I'm in the middle of right now. It's Dinosaurs at the Dinner Party by Edward Dolnick. And it's really hard to believe just because of how much dinosaurs are a part of our lives ever since childhood. What kid isn't fascinated with dinosaurs? But we really didn't know about their existence until the early 1800s. People weren't aware that they existed. And so it wasn't until then that some dinosaur tracks were found and then some fossils, and they had to figure out how to piece them together into what we imagine they look like today. And this was a big disruption for society, for science, for religion, for ordinary humans who have to contend with like these creatures that no one knew actually were a part of our world. And it also upended our relationship with time as well, because obviously dinosaurs existed millions of years ago, and religion and other aspects their timelines didn't coincide. So Edward Dolnick documents this paradigm shift in a really entertaining and fascinating nonfiction book that profiles some of the eccentric people at its center. So one of the people you learn about is Mary Anning, who is a young woman with a knack for finding fossils, and she did that to support her family. And her contributions were often overlooked. There's also some eccentric scientists who are kind of putting out these theories that not everyone believes in. Also a sculptor who was commissioned to try to craft what dinosaurs might look like in life-size replicas. And he was the host of the dinner party of the title. So this one is told in very short chapters, again, with that very entertaining and accessible writing style. So this is, again, also a subject that all kids and probably secretly grown-ups too find fascinating. So I will give you plenty of fascinating fodder to share at your next dinner party too. All right. Up next, we have another fantasy, Masquerade by O. Sangoyomi. So Masquerade combines elements of the myth of Persephone along with pre-colonial 15th century West African history into an enthralling tale. So in this one, our main character lives in Timbuktu, and Timbuktu has recently been conquered and come under Yoruba rule. Dodo is a member of the Blacksmith Guild there, and she's already ostracized because the members of her guild are considered witches. And under Yoruba rule, conditions become even worse until suddenly they don't. Dodo is taken from her home because she's chosen by the warrior king to be his bride. There, Dodo finds a much different world full of wealth and power, but what will she do to hold on to it or to direct it in her favor? This is a debut novel that has been praised for its lyrical writing and its rich and immersive world building. This is for fans of Marlon James and his Black Leopard, Red Wolf, Sue Lin Tan, and S.A. Chakraborty, the David Bott trilogy. All right, next we have Lucy Undying by Kirsten White. And this one is also a version of a retelling, and this one is inspired by Dracula. So Kirsten White imagines a richer story for Lucy, Dracula's first victim, in Lucy Undying. We get the sometimes altered events of the book from Lucy's perspective, but then we go on and imagine what life for Lucy might be after she's been turned into a vampire. And when she's trying to evade Dracula, she comes into her powers and even falls in love. Interspersed, we get the story of another woman named Iris, who is the daughter and heir to a health company that she wants nothing to do with. Her story gets connected to Lucy's in different ways. Just like Dracula, part of this novel is told in an epistolary format, and so we get both the journal entries of Lucy, which Iris discovers, and we also get Lucy's therapy transcripts. So if you're a voyeur, you might like that aspect as well. But also this is for readers who enjoy Gothic stories, who really like reimagined classics and queer love stories, then Lucy Undying might be one to put on your reading list. Great. If you are into historical fiction, up next we have Catherine the Wright Sister by Tracy Anderson Wood, who is kind of an up-and-coming writer in historical fiction. And so Orville and Wilbur Wright are two of the most famous siblings in history, known for inventing the first airplane. But the brothers also had a sister too, Catherine, who was also instrumental to their success, though her contributions have mostly gone overlooked and unacknowledged. Catherine graduated from Oberlin and was a teacher, while also managing her family's bicycle business, which helped free up time so her older brothers could focus on their inventions. But Catherine contributed to the inventions also. So she studied bird anatomy, that helped some aspects of that made it into their designs. She made other suggestions too, like Kitty Hawk. She suggested that as the locale for their first flight. But Catherine is often torn between her devotion and duty to her brothers and also her own dreams. And this novel depicts that internal struggle as well. This one is told from multiple perspectives. So both Catherine and Orville and Wilbur all get turns telling parts of the story. And so this one is for those of you who enjoy historical fiction that adds flavor to familiar stories and key moments in history, as well as ones that let unacknowledged characters shine, like Catherine Wright. So there have been kind of some other really great novels and nonfiction about female aviators and connected people to that. So books like The Aviator's Wife by Melanie Benjamin, The Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead, Fly Girls by Keith O'Brien. This would also probably make a really great companion to David McCullough's book on the Wright brothers as well. Next up, we have more historical fiction based on real life stories. In this case, the life story of Peggy Guggenheim. Peggy tells the life of heiress and art collector Peggy Guggenheim, who is also the namesake of the famous museum in New York. This novel was mostly written by Rebecca Godfrey, but Godfrey sadly died of cancer, and so this book was finished by her good friend Leslie Jamison, who is a really fantastic nonfiction writer of essays and memoirs. But the story is about Peggy, who was born into this family dynasty and then had to figure out how she was going to make her own name and her own place within it. She was also deeply affected by her father's death on the Titanic, with whom she was very close and shared her love of art with. So the fact of his death inspired Peggy to pursue her life with passion and adventure and fill it with art and beauty and love. So among the many things that she did in her life were help saving art and artists from the Nazis. She also moved in the same circles as some really famous figures in both art and literature. So people like Man Ray and James Joyce and Samuel Beckett, with whom she had a love affair. You might know Peggy only as the name on the famous museum in New York, but Godfrey's novel gives you glimpses behind the famous facade to the passionate woman beneath. So then if you love books by writers like Tracy Chevalier and Susan Breland, who often incorporate art, famous art and artists in their work, or other books like that, like The Age of Light by Whitney Schreiber, you might want to give this a try. And also a heads up, our winter reading challenge theme beginning in January is works of art. So it will be all about books about art and artists. So if you want to jump on that theme, this is a book that might get you in the mood for that. Up next, we have our second book that has a tie into a movie that's popular right now. Robert Harris is known for his historical thrillers, and his books have been adapted into movies like Enigma and the very recent buzzy Conclave that is playing now. And those are just two of his films or series based on his novels. And Precipice is his latest, which draws upon the real-life love affair between a wealthy socialite, Venetia Stanley, and H.H. Asquith, the British Prime Minister, who is decades her senior. And this book even includes some outtake from Asquith's correspondence with Stanley. Harris ups the stakes of this kind of love story by including details about Asquith's reluctant entry into World War I, which ramps up the historical import of this novel. And the mystery and intrigue come in the form of a drowning that's being investigated by Sergeant Paul Deemer, which eventually includes leaks of state secrets that may or may not have a connection. So again, this one is part historical fiction, part love story, part thriller. And because it is written by Robert Harris, it also has a very cinematic appeal and style to it. All right. Next, we have The Night Ends with Fire by K.X. Song. This one is the first book in a planned duology that takes its inspiration from the legend of Mulan. So in this update, the three kingdoms that are at war, and Maylin's father is drafted and refuses to go. He's addicted to opium, not really a great father to Maylin, and so he concocts a scheme to marry her off in order to make off with her dowry. Well, Maylin wants nothing to do with that, and so she decides instead to take her father's place at war, disguising herself as a boy. It's also there that she kind of discovers her true strength and ability and power. So in training and in battle, Maylin is basically influenced by three different forces. There is Prince Sky, who is the person who trains her. There is an enemy prince who challenges her. And then there's also this sea dragon spirit that manifests as a voice in her head. Malin is not a perfect heroine. She's flawed and complicated, often very morally gray, as she's caught between duty and power in her new position. There's also a light romantic element that looks to ramp up in the second book for those of you who are really into romantasy right now. So readers of Shelley Parker Chan or Tasha Suri will want to give this one a try. Also fans of Milan, of course. Up next, we have another romance, The Truth According to Ember by Danica Nava. I really loved that we're starting to see much more diverse representation in that genre. But up until now, we've seen very few Indigenous characters. And this is the first one that I've read and I really enjoyed. It's also a workplace romance and friends to lovers trope as well. So Ember is our heroine. She works at a bowling alley with her best friend, and there's some comic adventures that happen there. She's dropped out of college when she no longer had the tuition because she had to help her family out. And she keeps applying for jobs over and over and over and gets rejection after rejection after rejection. And she's not sure, is it because of her Native American background? Is it her lack of education? So in order to find out, she applies to be an accountant, but she fudges both her education credentials and checks the Caucasian box in the job application instead, and ends up landing a job as an accountant. In her new company, she meets Danua. So obviously, Ember is hiding these big secrets about her identity and her credentials, and she's wondering, will her secret be discovered? And the first one to do so is Danua, the company's IT guy, who also is a fellow native. As the two become closer, an attraction develops, and Ember becomes uneasy at the many deceptions she's forced to hide, including her relationship with Danua himself, as her company has a no fraternization policy. So this one's not only just a really beautiful love story with indigenous characters who we don't often see in the romance genre, but it also explores familial and cultural dynamics in really interesting ways as well. And some humor too. So this one is for fans of workplace romance, like Weather Girl by Rachel Lynn Solomon, Circling Back to You by Julie Tu, or The Kiss Countdown by Etta Easton. All right, next up is another one I have checked out right now, The Naming Song by Jedediah Barry. And this one, the power, the magic exists in names, in words. And this fantasy novel with a linguistics-based magic system. So in this world, words and names at one point disappeared. And so there's now a names committee that is responsible for naming the nameless. And our unnamed narrator is a courier responsible for delivering names to their new objects. But there is a nameless group in opposition. When the courier's boss is murdered, she is suspected and so sets off to avoid being punished and to find her missing sister. The courier has a few companions on her journey. There's a patchwork ghost who sketches the world, and a monster accompanies her as well. So this one has a really unique magic system being based on linguistics. And readers are going to be swept away not only on this quest that the courier undergoes, but also discovering the mystery behind why the names disappeared to begin with. So this one is for fans of other book and word-related fantasies. So books like Mark Lawrence's Library Trilogy, A.J. Hockwit's Hell's Library Trilogy, or The Starless Sea by Aaron Morgenstern. All right, next we have William, which is one of my recent reads by Mason Coyle. This one is horror, thriller, sci-fi, really kind of interesting blend of all of them. It's also a kind of a novella, so it's very slim. You could read it in one sitting. And so this book is about Henry and Lily. They are a couple that live in this really high-tech smart home. They're both incredibly brilliant. She's this businesswoman with this high-powered career. He's an engineer, but he's also an agoraphobic. And so for the past few years, he just spends all of his time locked up in his home laboratory and doesn't venture outside. He's tinkering with this project, which is the creation of this robot named William. When Lily invites two of her colleagues to the house, Henry decides it's finally time to unveil William to Lily and to her guests. And that is when things start to go wrong. Both William and the house itself turn from smart to scary. So this is both kind of a modern kind of take on the haunted house when the house itself has technology that works against you, but also one about technological hubris gone wrong. Alongside the kind of scary thriller horror elements, there are also some really incredible twists that upend what you think of various characters. All right. Up next, we have Full Speed to a Crash Landing by Beth Revis. What's more fun than a heist novel? Well, how about a heist novel set in space? And that's the premise of this first book in Beth Revis's Chaotic Orbits trilogy. Ada Lamar is at the scene of a spaceship wreck, but she's got a bigger problem on her hands. Her spacesuit is short on oxygen, and so she's not sure how she's going to survive. The good news for her is that a government salvage crew is there to rescue her. The bad news, she isn't able to recover all the loot from the wreck. So the government ship takes her on, and Rian White, the government agent in charge of the mission, and Ada are both carefully guarding their real motives and missions that took them to this wreck in the first place. At the same time, there's this romantic tension that's mounting between them, but so do the suspicions that they have about each other. This one is set in the near future where Earth is on the brink of collapse and they're looking for other planets for colonization as a way to recover its former glory, but also as a way to kind of help rebuild Earth too. So there's also some elements of climate change and things like that alongside the fun space romp adventure romance too. So this is a novella, so again, it's very short and it's the first one in the series. And if you enjoy this one, you won't have long to wait for its sequel because the second book, How to Steal a Galaxy, is out December 3rd. This one is for fans of Constance Fay, for fans of Alex White's August Mecha series, and the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. All right, up next is another one of my recent reads, The History of Sound by Ben Shattuck. This is a collection of short stories, and I know short stories can sometimes be a tough sell. I even have a hard time selling some of my librarians on short story collections. So here's my pitch for short stories in general. If you know that feeling that you get when you finish a really amazing book, you can have that feeling multiple times in a short story collection. And if you end up with a dud, you're out 20 minutes instead of 2 weeks. But this particular collection, my sell for it is this. It is set in New England in various time periods with intersecting characters and themes of love, loss, and longing. It's very beautifully written, very moving as well. The title story of this one is slated to be a movie starring Paul Mescal and Josh O'Connor. So you'll have that to look forward to as well. So that title story is set in 1919 Maine and follows two men who spend a summer recording folk musicians on wax cylinders, and they conduct a short-lived affair while they're out collecting these recordings. These recordings come up in a later story, Origin Stories, when a woman discovers them in the floorboards of the house she moved into. Some of the other stories in the collection include The Ock, which has at the center of it this poignant story about a photograph. And This photograph was printed in newspapers around the world and attract all sorts of people to this town. And this tells the very poignant and moving story behind that photograph. And then there's also Graft, which is about a woman who encounters a boy in a museum, which brings back really strong emotions and buried memories for her. Again, a very beautiful and moving collection. So not only is the first story set to be a movie, but it also has an incredible audiobook narrated by Paul Mescal, Nick Offerman, Ed Helms, Dion Graham, and Jenny Slate, who is also the author's wife. Up next is Glass Houses by Madeline Ashby. So in this one, a tech company is celebrating their latest AI breakthrough. And so they decide to go on this company retreat, and their plane crashes on a deserted island. Fortuitously, at least at first, the island is also equipped with an abandoned but fully stocked high-tech mansion. And so they immediately go there for refuge, but is it really the refuge they think it is? So taking charge of this group is not the CEO of the company, who has lots of anxiety and eccentricities, but the firm's chief emotional manager, Kristen, who is in a sort of fuzzy HR kind of role. So Kristen has to try to keep her team intact and their fears at bay, all while they search for a way off of the island. That becomes increasingly more difficult when more and more of her colleagues start disappearing. But Kristen, behind her fuzzy HR demeanor, emotional manager position, has resilience and survival skills forged from her own past. Will she be up to the task? So if you think your job is a nightmare, you might want to also check out this book. And also other workplace thriller horror novels like Very Bad Company by Emma Rosenblum, The Warehouse by Rob Hart, or The Scary Survival Stories of T.J. Newman. All right, up next is another nonfiction, Gather Me by Gloria Edom. Gloria Edom is the founder of the Well-Read Black Girl book group and blog. And so this memoir is really all about the power of books and literature and libraries in all of her lives. And she tells her own personal story and connection to reading, to books, to her first encounters with writers like Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, and Audre Lorde as well. So I always try to include books in these presentations that appeal to readers and people who love books, because those are the kinds of people who would attend a program like this. And so that is my nod to this one. So it is for readers of books like the Toni Morrison Book Club by Judah Bennett and Dear Fahrenheit 451 by Annie Spence. Next up, we have May the Wolf Die by Elizabeth Hyder. This one, our author is a former Navy analyst turned mystery writer. And so it brings in lots of kind of interesting and fun military connections and expertise into this mystery. Our main character in this one is Nikki Serafino. She is a military investigator who is called to investigate when an unidentified body is found in the water, and it turns out to be an American sailor. So in the course of the investigation, she ends up being this liaison between the Italian troops and the US military. But her investigation begins to reveal even more connections between Italy and the US, specifically between the Italian organized crime and the US military. This mystery stands out for its really kind of atmospheric Italian setting. It's set in Naples. And its complex portrayal of a woman in a male-dominated setting, which again, the author draws on her own background as a former military analyst to write about. And so these connections between organized crime and the military not only up the stakes and the danger, but add layers of kind of social commentary to the story as well. So you love the kind of atmospheric settings of Donna Leon's Italian mysteries, or Ilaria Tutti is another one. You might enjoy picking up this new series. All right. And next we have Once More from the Top by Emily Layden. If you are a Taylor Swift fan, this one imagines a Taylor Swift-like pop star who is known for her confessional storytelling. This pop star in this novel is called Dylan Reed. And Dylan, what has not made it into Dylan's, confessional lyrics is the story about her high school best friend, Kelsey, who disappeared when they were sophomores. Now Dylan is at the height of her pop stardom with all of the public scrutiny that accompanies it, and Kelsey's body is found. So this not only unlocks new grief, renewed grief for Dylan as she deals with this new wrinkle in the case of her best friend, but it also inspires her to question the narrative that both she and others had shaped around Kelsey's disappearance. So this one is for fans of music-inspired books like Daisy Jones and the Six, The Last Days of the Midnight Ramblers by Sarah Tomlinson, but also those who really like kind of nuanced stories about the past catching up to the present, dealing with grief and heartbreak and fame. All of those aspects are here in this debut novel by Emily Layden. All right. Okay, well, good. This is also a read-alike for the People We Keep by Allison Larkin. So you might want to give this one a try too. Okay, so all of these books are out right now and you should be able to check out, but I wanted to give you a quick taste of a few books to come. So the first one I wanted to share is The Last One by Rachel Halsell Hall. Rachel Halsell Hall started out as a mystery writer. She wrote the really great Detective Eloise Norton series set in LA. She moved on to write some psychological suspense, psychological thriller books, and now she's starting to try fantasy with this particular book. So our main character in this one is Kai. Kai wakes up with no memory of who she is or how she happened to get to this really desolate land with these strange creatures that she doesn't know what's going on. All she knows is she has this compulsion that she has to reach the Sea of Devour to escape. After witnessing a local blacksmith and his fighting skills, she decides that he needs to accompany her on her journey. And she finds out that he both annoys her and attracts her in equal measures. So if you're someone who enjoys romantasy, this might be the next big series to try. I really love books that are kind of play with metafiction, and so I'm excited about Daniel Ehlman's I Might Be in Trouble. So this book is about a novelist who is struggling with this book. So he picks up his phone and tries out an app and goes on a date. And he's hoping that this date might be a distraction for him. So he has one of the best nights of his life until he wakes up in the morning and his date is dead beside him. What happened? Well, he doesn't know. Was he to blame? Doesn't know that either. And so he and his literary agent must find out and decide what details might make their way into his novel and this darkly humorous story. This one comes out December 3rd. So does The Last One by Rachel Halsell Hall. And then coming in January, if you like literary fiction, if you're in a book group and you're looking for a book to discuss with your book group, Mothers and Sons by Adam Hazlitt should be on your reading list. I really loved Adam Hazlitt's Imagine Me Gone, which was a really moving and compassionate story about mental illness and its impact on a family. And so his latest, Mothers and Sons, follows an estranged mother and son duo who must finally confront the decision and the secret behind it that tore them apart. And so I can't wait to find that out on January 7th when this book comes out. All right, so those are all the titles that I have to share with you tonight. I would love if you have any questions or if there's any books that you're excited about, please, you can put them in the chat or unmute yourself. I'm happy to hear about them. And while you're thinking on that, I know Cheryl mentioned that our next Buzzworthy book program is on January 7th. And that one is a special one because we are going to be talking about the best books of 2024. So MCPL is getting ready to launch our annual best books website with a bunch of book lists of our MCPL staff members' favorite books of 2024. And so those will be coming to our website starting December 1st, but our January 7th program I'm going to be talking about my best books of 2024. Some of the books I didn't get to in 2024 that I want to based on the survey from our staff, as well as teasing some of the books from 2025 that I'm most excited about too.
Okay, and I just put a link to registration for the January 7th Buzzworthy books, and I also put a link for a survey for tonight's program, if you have a moment. A lot of fun.
Yeah, and if you have any questions about any of the books I talked about tonight, if you want to share your best book of 2024, you're welcome to do so.
January 7th, okay. Mhm. Okay, that sounds like everybody had a good time tonight. Doesn't look like we have any questions. I'll go ahead and tell everyone to have a nice holiday next week. Can't believe it's Thanksgiving already. And we'll see you all in January. Good night.
All right, thank you, Cheryl.
Mhm.